Yes, well, my name is Nancy Devol Rose, and I grew up I started out down in Haydenville when I was 7 years old. We moved up the holler to Clay Mine Holler, Rattlesnake Holler, Red Row Holler. It had different names, and Company Road. But I don't know just how long I have here. I had some extra things I wanted to say, but I'm just going to start saying that my memories of Haydenville, it was a beautiful little town, clean, neat, and the first thing I remember, one of the earliest memories, was the flowers. Everybody had flowers sitting out on the front in their pots and so forth. But because this is about the trains, I want to tell that I was on one of the last passenger trains to go through. It wasn't the very last one, but it was one because Mother, she heard that they might close down, and so she said, well, I want the girls my sister and I, to go on a train ride. And so she she made us little matching dresses and embroidery and everything. And I remember it so well. I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. But we got on that train there in Haydenville, and it went to Athens. That's where my grandmother and all them lived. And so I can remember it so plain because we was at the sitting on there, and you know how the train wheels will go tut-tut-tut or something. Everything's a music thing to me. And so I would say the whole way I was going, Elizabeth, Elizabeth, Elizabeth. How I did that, why, I don't know. So, but anyway, where we lived in Haydenville when I was little was that school. Haydenville had a beautiful school then, right along Route 33, and we lived in the first brick house right north of the school. And so right on Route 33, it was only 2 lanes, and then you had the culverins, like where the canal had been, and then there was the train. So actually it was just a few yards, really, from where we lived. And so I got my first life lesson from that railroad track, because at one point I was outside playing in the front yard. I was around 3.5 years old. And all of a sudden, as the train went through Haydenville, it would just slow down and go slowly, through town. And all of a sudden this day, these creatures or whatever, I didn't know what they were, jumped off and scattered in all directions. They were black from head to toe. Everything they had on, everything was black. And they just scattered, went to different homes, knocked on doors, and lo and behold, as I stood there, frightened, one headed to my house and headed right toward me. So I went screaming into the house, and Mother, she came up to see what was going on, and she looked out. She said, now, Nancy, you stay right here, and I'll go out, and I'll see what's going on. And so she did. She went out. Then she came back in, and she said, now, Nancy, sit down in your little chair. I want to tell you something. She said, these people that you see, they are called hobos. And the war has been over now, and they have nothing to eat, and they have no homes, and they are they go around from town to town, and they knock on doors and ask for something to eat or do a little bit of work. And she said, they're not going to hurt you. And the reason they're so black, their clothes, the man that came to my door, he had on like a suit, but of course it was black, just totally black with soot and dirt. And she said, now, here's what I'm going to do. She said, the Bible says that sometimes we entertain angels unaware. So she said, I'm going to go and I'm going to fix him a sandwich and a bowl of soup, and then he'll eat that, and then he will probably leave with the rest of them on the next train that goes through. So that's what happened. But that was a big life lesson for me. And I'm telling you here today, after all these years, I was like 3 years old then, that to this day, I think about acts of charity and helping people, because you never know, you might be an angel unaware. So that's my train story. These hobos, they, just like if any of you remember seeing stories about the hobos. That's exactly, they had a stick over their shoulder, and then they had a big cloth tied in a knot at the end of this stick, and everything they owned was wrapped up in that cloth. And of course it wasn't very big. But I can still remember that after all these years, and it had a big effect on my life. Also, so I wanted to talk about Haydenville and the plant. It was a nice, beautiful little town, Haydenville was then, very different. But we lived by the plant whistle. The factory whistle would blow like to start work. When it was ended, lunchtime, when lunchtime was over, somebody died, the plant whistle was always humming for something. Then they had the train that went through 3 or 4 times a day, and then you would hear the train whistle. And then, of course, on Sunday you had the church bells ringing. So you could always tell about what time it was by these different sounds in Haydenville. I also want to tell you about when growing up in Haydenville, the only thing that people looked forward to all year was the Christmas party. There was a big community hall in Haydenville then. And so at Christmas, sometime during the Christmas week, everybody would gather, come out of the hollers and so forth and so on, and gather at this community hall and sing Christmas songs and so forth. And then before you know it, Santa Claus would put in an appearance. Well, we had waited all year for this. And every kid got a treat. It was a brown paper bag about so big. And it was just filled with oranges and nuts and hardtack and chocolate drops and orange slices. And it was all yours. Is there anybody here that remembers that maybe was back besides me? Back there, nobody. But anyway, that was the highlight of the year. And of course you got that treat, and every kid in the family got one. And so you didn't have to share it or anything like that. It was just all yours. And there was a lot of poverty and everything back in the day. And so a lot of times that was the only piece of candy that some of these kids would get. So, I don't know how much time. Haydenville was a clean little town, and you never had any trouble except during Halloween when maybe the boys would overturn an outhouse or something like that, if anybody remembers those days. But one time I did remember that I seen a constable or a policeman. He was all dressed in a black uniform, and my dad was outside talking with him, and I started crying because I thought somehow that he was coming, was going to arrest me and take me to jail. But I don't know what I thought I'd done that he was going to take me to jail for. But anyway, there was just no crime or anything like that. When I was 7 years old, we moved, for some reason my dad, he wanted to move up the holler, up the clay mine holler where they took the clay out for the Haydenville. There was a train track up there, and it went right past our house. It was a little miniature train track. And they would haul all the clay out of the mine up there and take it clear back through the tunnel and into Haydenville. I'm not going to talk too much. Oh, I do want to say this. They called it Rattlesnake Holler up there also. And Red Row Holler was what they called it. But my mom, she said, I'm not going to move up. She was from Athens. She said, I'm not going to move up there and live in one of those old shacky red houses. So they painted it white. So we had the only white house up there. But the day that we moved in, my dad, they were trying to get the furniture and everything moved in. Lo and behold, there laid a big diamondback rattlesnake right there in front of the front door jamb. So my dad, he killed the snake and cut off the rattlers, and I had them until a couple years ago. But he killed the snake, and of course you was allowed to do that back then. They wouldn't arrest you or fine you or anything. But anyway, the big boss, which was Clarence Matheny, who, I don't know if does anybody here remember him? Yeah, we got a few. Well, he was the big boss over the whole NATCO, and practically over Haydenville itself. Well, anyway, he wanted that snake and that snake skin, and so he had himself a belt made out of it. So that's the last I heard of that. I also want to, because I wrote a song, I'm going to sing a song I wrote about living up Red Row Holler. But there was a boarding house up there in the holler at the end of at the mine. It had been built there around 1870 for the immigrants and miners and people that came to work at NATCO finally, and they didn't have any place to stay. But anyway, when I lived up there, there in the 50s, it had been abandoned. But we had to go up there, and there was a water pump right there, and we had to haul every bit of our water from there. And that was one of the jobs that I despised, because those milk cans we put it in were very heavy, and I was a little tiny skinny thing. But anyway, my mother-in-law, when I met my husband, I was 15 years old, and he was from Union Furnace, and so when he introduced me to his mother, Jeanette Walker, she said, you live up there in that Red Row Holler by that boarding house. I was born there. So my mother-in-law was born in that boarding house up there. And we have a few of us put a monument up at Red Row Holler up there a couple of years ago. We had to get permission from Wayne National Forest. And they okayed it and the whole thing. But we have tours and things up there every once in a while, and this is a replica of the monument that we have put up there. It's a big monument, as you know, dedicated to the Appalachian people and so forth that settled in the area at Haydenville and all around. Well, anyway, I'm going to sing a song I wrote about living up. Well, when we dedicated this and we was preparing it, I said, well, I'm going to write a song about it. That's what I do. I write songs. And so I said, I'll write a song and sing it during the dedication. So, do you want me to sing now? Okay. So that's about, I've got more I could say. If you want to ask me about anything later or anything, go ahead. You know, I'm willing. I love to talk about growing up in Red Row Holler and Haydenville, because, you know, I don't want to ever forget where I came from. This is a song that I wrote, as I said, about, and I tried to get everything in I could think of. Well, I was thinking about Red Row Holler today, about the stories of Red Row Way, about those families mining that tall play of Hopperview and Red Road, USA. About those tricky tall roads lined with millions of tiny toes, buried kicking in the old strip pit, but watching out for rattlers so I don't get bit. Well, we were swinging on the grapevines up in the mine, waiting in Salter to pick up the time. Waiting in Salter to supper time. Hauling water from up at the mine, then hanging our clothes on the old clothesline. Getting stuck in the quicksand at the old strip pit, making it out Sunday morning it could bring on the sin. Daddy get a bottle at the 5 Mile Inn. We'd get happy and we'd all sing Amazing Grace. Then he'd wring the neck of the old white hen. We had chicken and dumplings then. Life it was grand up Red Rose Holler Way. Well, they buried Mr. Potts one day, and many others, so they say. The boys taking up Red Road Holler Way. Then the railroad cars, they ran astray, down the tracks and all the way, past the roundhouse and old Charlie's shack, through the tunnel and over that hill, right on to Haydenville, and because still roam those places, so rumors say. Now the women at the boarding house mourn, and they beat their chest, then they prayed, and they did their best to keep their homes and their families going strong. Soon lovers soon, babes were born, pretty soon then life moved on, 'cause that is the Appalachian way. Monument remains today of Poplarville and Red Road Way, as the truth these miners' minds as old as clay.